Welcome to another episode of Mazars COVID Talks. It is Friday, April 17th. My name's Tashonda Hagerbrook, and I'm with the Organizational Resilience Practice at Mazars USA, and my co-host.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Jurnak. I'm a senior manager in our entrepreneurial business services and advisory group at Mazars USA.
And today we're joined by Lisa Minniti-Soska, and you guys please correct me if I'm butchering your names, and Kyle Wissel. Wissel. Sorry, Kyle. Thank you.
No
you know,
problem.
I did that intentionally so that you...
Make sure the mic works.
Right, exactly. That was our test. Lisa heads the construction group in the Mazars USA real estate practice, serving general construction, construction management, home builders, and specialty contractor clients. Kyle works as a tax principal in our real estate market segment, and he focuses on providing tax compliance and planning and business advisory solutions to real estate owners, operators, and developers. So welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Last week, we got a chance to speak with some of your colleagues there in the real estate practice, and we were really focused on the CARES Act and how that's impacting the real estate industry. And Alicia and I both thought it'd be a great idea to evolve this conversation and really just keep it going for what are some of the next steps in real estate.
Yeah, so I think the next steps are to, I think you spoke a lot about the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, which is to get some cash back into some of our clients' hands and their pockets so that they can continue to weather out this pandemic. So now we're starting to hear that some of these loans are starting to be approved, which is a good thing. I think it builds some hope from some of our client base. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the focus for the moment has been on short-term liquidity need, and which is a very obviously sound thought process. And I think a lot of that focus is also centered around keeping people employed. Again, a good policy objective. And I think the next steps are going to be centered around, what's next, what longer term are we going to be thinking about in terms of, engagement with businesses and, the federal government and the interplay there.
It sounds like there are, several opportunities, but I want to dive a little bit into what you mentioned there, Kyle, with keeping people in their jobs, because that keeps coming up in every topic that we talk about for COVID Talks. And just as we engaging with different clients, I know working in the OR space, we're working in the public sector, private sector, and this is a major concern. So what are you guys seeing? Is there anything, innovative coming out of the industry that's helping people to stay in their jobs?
So I'm not sure how innovative it is, but I see a lot of shifting of projects. So projects that may have been on their backlog that are considered essential, they're able to still continue working on that from a construction perspective. So I'm seeing a lot of transition and shifting of projects. I spoke to a couple of our clients, and right now they are still fully being utilized, which is great. They're concerned more from a long-term perspective and how that will fall out. But right now, I think the fact that if you're dynamic, where you're in multiple different sectors, it's a little bit more helpful to sustain this a little bit longer than some that are more into one sector.
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off of that, it depends on what segment or subsector you're in real estate. So as an example, if you're if you're a restaurateur, what you're concerned about is how do you keep your employees engaged when there's no one who can actually go and sit down in a restaurant. So you're focusing on what's the business model that we're going to at least attempt at this point in time, and that might be delivery. So you're now focused on how do I get people into the mode where they're going to be working on having food delivered or catered and how do I make sure that they stay safe in doing that? At the same time, you want to make sure that you're able to pay them so that they can continue to maintain their own living expenses and their own personal needs as they move forward.
And what are you hearing from the landlords?
Well, in the short term, it hasn't really impacted them in as much as they've gotten rents for March. And in many cases, the April rents were about where they expected them to be. And in some cases, they were even better. I think the bigger question is going to be, what are the rents going to look like on a go-forward basis as this crisis extends out? Lisa?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I think, they were fine through, April 1st. April 1st was the first touch point where the uncertainty started. But like what Kyle said, I think going forward is where, long-term is going to be what they're, concerned about.
I also would say that as you obtain more information and it becomes clearer as to what's going to be happening with your tenants, whether they be multifamily tenants or commercial tenants, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions, primarily around things like, do I need to engage with my lender? Do I need to speak with my employees who primarily service these tenants? Those are the questions that you're going to need to address as this crisis extends out.
Yeah, and from a development side, home building is considered essential business, but the problem is that with the increase in layoffs, people are making different decisions whether they're ready to move or not move at this point. So that's going to affect them as well, where, come March 31st, they thought that they were in a good position, but now they'll have to rethink and strategize on how they can get through this period.
Yeah, one thing I think it's just sort of as a little bit of an anecdote here. I was speaking with a client just the other day, and one of the things that worked as a sort of a counterweight to the fact that maybe your rents have decreased or will decrease in the short term is that if you happen to have variable rate debt, your interest expense is only going to decrease. So he was suggesting, and he was telling me, hey, listen, rents may decrease in the short term, but the interest expense is going to decrease pretty dramatically in the short term also. So it was just sort of the silver lining, if you will.
From an interest rate perspective, I think with the low interest rates that, even though the economy is slowing down, the interest rates are going to remain probably low at this point. So the infrastructure sector may gain some steam, at least at the federal level, I would think. But the flip side related to that, like private markets, I think may struggle and have more of a slower significantly due to maybe the lending shortages, I would think. But I think to Kyle's point, from a development perspective, the lower interest rates could help with some projects.
I also think in terms of other opportunities, perhaps if you were an owner operator or just a business owner in general, and you were contemplating sort of space needs, you're going to rethink that, and perhaps you don't need to spend as much on rent of office space as you might have thought you needed to, which I think is an opportunity. I think there's also going to be an opportunity to obtain office space in a way, on the basis that it may be more available in prime locations for less cost than it would have otherwise been pre-COVID-19 crisis. And I think one other thing that may be worth noting is that there will be talented people that are going to need or will be looking for jobs in the short and midterm. So if you need talent, it may be as good a time as you're going to be seeing in the near future to do that now, to really evaluate what your needs are, because there are people that have been let go, not because they weren't good at what they do, but merely there were costs that needed to be reduced, and they just happened to be the victims of that.
Really good point.
So Kyle, your point to the, I guess, reducing workspace, I know that could hurt the landlord, but what about the existing tenant? They're already in a contract for how many years? What could they do to be able to, alleviate some of those costs?
That one I think may be a little bit trickier, but I think we're seeing a lot of business owners really give a long, hard look at how they use their space and whether they can repurpose some of the space to better use to meet the demands of a workforce that's evolving not just now, but will be evolving once we start back on some sort of normal path.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be important that tenants work really closely with their landlords, because their objectives are aligned. They both want to see the other thrive. So I think tenants need to go back to their landlords and discuss, hey, listen, how can we make this work going forward? Because again, we're in this together.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
So Kyle, are you suggesting that business owners are actually pivoting and looking at and modifying their business plans? Focus?
I think they are. I think one of the things that this whole remote workforce has shed some light on is how teams of employees are going to be working together on a prospective basis. And I think we've seen that in our own workforce, where we've determined that you can bring people together and have them collaborate in a way that wasn't possible when people were in different locations, because you never thought about it in the way that you could have these teams set up, you could have Zoom meetings, you can have sort of shared spaces in Microsoft Teams as an example, whereby people can work together towards an objective, even though they're scattered, here and there. So I think that's one thing that I think there's going to be a pivot to, where you're going to see even more collaboration, if that makes any sense, after this, because you were forced to do that. The environment required that you collaborate, even though it might have seemed more difficult.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that it had to take a crisis like this to get us to start taking these practices. But in the OR space, we've been having this conversation for years with clients about, are you prepared for being a completely remote workforce? Have you looked into what that would look like if you could not access your facility for a week, 2 weeks, 30 days? And now we're all just being forced to, and it's really unfortunate, but I'm so glad we can all come together and share some insight. Kyle, you made some very good points, and I think it just kind of rolls us into our last topic area when we're talking about staying above water. And I know you guys mentioned that, you're seeing across the industry, yes, there's a focus on rent down the road. Is there something that organizations can do about that to plan ahead? And what are some other considerations to take if you had to just think about a few for business interruption that you would leave our listeners with?
So I would say that one of the things that has become really important is making sure that the lines of communication stay open. And to that end, you need to ensure that you're somehow communicating with your teams, and trying to do that on a periodic, repetitive basis, so that people know that, hey, we're still there, we're still behind you, we're still collaborating, we're still a workforce that has a common goal and an objective. Because if you don't do that under the current conditions, you're going to find that you're going to lose engagement, and that obviously would be a problem.
Right. And I also see a lot more, I think we mentioned like the collaboration, reaching out to, whether it's your customer or, a client of yours, or you talk to a client and they've been in contacts with customers. Everybody's in this together. So everyone has a common goal of, let's succeed the best we can to try to get out of that. So I think, although this is, a pandemic, and, I am seeing a lot of positive things come out of this, which is ironic. So that being said, I think a lot of businesses are probably taking note and taking stock of this and seeing how they can go forward if something were obviously to happen again. So strategic planning, I think, is really big. And I think it's a good time, especially if for those that are maybe not able to fully work at this point, that I think they can transition and start focusing on more from a planning perspective to look into the future.
I'd also say, from the strategic planning perspective, like you alluded to, Lisa, that modifying your existing business plan, or if you don't have one, preparing a business plan to reflect this new reality of a remote workforce in some way, shape, or form, is going to be really important. And also to incorporate business continuation and all the other lessons that are still ongoing during this crisis. So the business plan is going to be a hugely important thing to either modify, or if it's the first draft, then make sure that you execute on them.
I agree.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think that just lends to, Alicia, we've talked about it in the past, just offline, how important this conversation about business continuity and business defense planning, and just having strategies for your strategies and backup strategies for those strategies, right?
I think if you didn't have one before, now is absolutely the time to take a step back and assess, the impact of the pandemic to your business, and start planning, what does this look like, over the next several months, midterm and long term, and how are you able to adjust and plan accordingly?
To that point too, is I think anytime something like this occurs, there's always this, well, you don't know what you don't know, is one of those catchphrases that you hear quite often. But how frequently do businesses think about it? And maybe you should start considering, as an owner, what is it that we don't know? Can we even brainstorm around those things that, if they were to occur, would be seriously problematic for our future well-being?
And you just, basically summarized what we do in organizational resilience practice. Let's talk about those things. I'm serious. That's the constant conversation. And very often, the issue is, well, this is like insurance, and I don't believe that's going to happen to me. So I'm not going to pay for, having VPN available for every single employee. You didn't think you needed to use that, right? In a conversation I had back in November, that was where that stopped.
Right.
So, it just, now where we are seeing, it's definitely a paradigm shift for businesses, and what, you need to do to make sure you can survive It's going to change a lot. Such great information so far, guys. We like to always close with a note on personal preparedness. And this is, not necessarily so industry focused. You could share something that you've been doing, on your own or with your family, and even amongst your colleagues. But a note on personal preparedness for our listeners.
So we hold two things. We hold weekly Zoom calls with my family. So there's probably about 15 of us because we usually do family dinners on Sundays. So instead of the family dinners, we're still doing the Zoom meetings with the family, which is still chaos. And secondly, we've been taking our dog for a walk every day. And she's probably like, what is going on? Because she's so tired anymore. So those are the two things which I probably wouldn't have had time to do during, like if I was in the office. So those are good things that have come out of it.
That's beautiful. It's nice. I like the Sunday dinner idea. I'm gonna take that one back to my family. And Kyle?
I'd say that I try to adhere to a schedule so that my day is planned in much the same way as it was prior to all of this. So I like to work out in the morning. I still do that. I find that my family and I are planning more meals. I think it seems like that's sort of the one thing that you can work together on that everyone agrees is important. And once you've eaten one, you're already thinking about what is the next one going to be and what does everyone want and how do we get what we need to make that happen. Those are some of the things that we do. I found myself talking on the phone with my immediate family more than I ever have in recent years because we used to just see one another. So in some ways that's good, but I think like at the beginning of this year, I heard the phone start ringing. That was my brother, who we probably have spoken over the telephone, twice in the last 5 years because we see one another fairly frequently. Now it's phone calls. So things like Zoom meetings, trying to stay connected to friends. We've done some sort of game nights with people that I'm friendly with. People play poker and some do trivia. All of that sort of keeps you balanced, I think. And then I think the focus on trying to stay engaged with work and really commit to helping out our clients who really need it right now, and focusing on our own business has been really important as well. And honestly, it is a great diversion from everything else that's going on around you.
Yeah, absolutely. The days are longer, but they do go fast.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, this was really great, and I'm sure our listeners are enjoying it. I just want to take one more second to thank you both, Lisa and Kyle, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. This was excellent.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
For more information on the topics discussed today, visit us at mazarsusa.com/COVID-19. That's MAZARsusa.com/COVID-19. Remember, all information shared on Mazars COVID Talks extends from reputable sources. The views expressed here are meant to serve as suggestive guidance based on the knowledge and expertise of the co-hosts and guests. Thank you.